Good morning, everyone. It is so good to spend these moments with you. And if you are watching this as it premieres live, it is now December the 26th, the day after Christmas. And if you're anything like me, over the last couple of days, you probably have eaten a lot of very healthy, low-calorie foods in very low amounts. Or maybe not. And if you're also somewhat like me, on the 24th, you probably went to bed very early and you got up also very early on the 25th. Or maybe not, because that's not really how we do it in the culture that I'm from. But regardless of that, I do hope that over the last couple of days, you had an opportunity to spend quality time with people that you love and you cherish. And I know that the year 2020 has been an extremely challenging year for some, even more than for others. But I do hope that you found a way to spend moments that you will cherish with people that you love. Whether you did that virtually or in person, I hope that you did it safely and that you had a wonderful Christmas. And yet, above even that, I hope that you had some time to reflect on the story of Christmas. Because sometimes with everything that goes on this time of the year, all the busyness and running around and all the expectations and preparations, sometimes it is so easy to miss the essence, the reason why we do this. So today, once again, I want to take a few moments to walk us through the story of Christmas. But this time, we are going to do it live nativity style. Because if you were here a couple of weeks ago and you were able to come out and be a part of our live nativity, you know that we had a good time. And I think a very meaningful time as well. And if you missed out, hey, you missed out, but at least we'll share a little bit of what happened. And I do want to take a moment before we even start to thank everyone who made our Christmas celebration possible. It took a lot of sweat and blood, and yes, there was real sweat and a little bit of real blood too. Nothing major, but it took a lot. There were tears. Yes, there were very real tears, and sometime we'll share all the stories behind the scenes. But at the end of the day, there was overwhelming joy as we celebrate the advent of Jesus. And one of the things that I enjoyed the most was seeing this thing coming together. It started very small, and then friends started reaching out to friends, and everything began to grow and grow and grow. And it was amazing seeing that happen. And I want to give a shout out to Tom and Carrie, not to single them out, but because they kind of led this effort. And something amazing that happened is as Carrie and Tom started calling their friends, they started telling them, we're doing a live nativity. Do you have something to help us? And all of a sudden, lights started showing up and sound system. It turns out that PTs have really cool PT friends that have a lot of cool stuff. And being a live nativity, somebody said, well, we have live animals. Wouldn't live animals, work at a live nativity? And we said, of course. So Carrie calls me and says, I have a friend that has goats. And I had to do some thinking there because I was thinking, Matthew, Luke, John, definitely John doesn't talk about goats. And I don't think that Luke and Matthew tell us anything about goats either, but hey, they don't tell us that they didn't have goats. So of course, let's have them, bring them on. By the way, I heard that shepherding sheep is overrated. So let's give our shepherds some real work, as they didn't have to jump up and down all night while the angels appeared. If that wasn't enough, now they also had to take care of goats. And by the way, those goats were beautiful. There was a baby goat that was just born. You should have seen it. You missed out. And then somebody else said, I have a friend that owns an event company, and they may have something that we could use. So we started making phone calls, and lo and behold, we found a donkey and a camel. It was a humongous camel. That's how my son would probably say it. And it was a sight to see. If you didn't come, you missed out. And just in case you want to know, it wasn't alive. Come on, let's be realistic here. But if you wanted to talk something about that was alive, after a lot of persuasion and making some phone calls, we even persuaded an alpaca to play the role of a camel for an actual live nativity scene. It was really, really a good night. But if we're honest, it is the story behind all those stories that makes this even more amazing. And yet, also incredible. If you were to maybe share with a friend that came to visit you and for some reason they had never heard about the story of Christmas, it would make for some pretty interesting conversation. Because if you had to explain Christmas, it would go something like this. Over 2,000 years ago, in a very contested piece of land called the Middle East, in a little town that probably you never been to and most likely you never will go to, a child was born. And because of that, in the year 2020, we decorate our trees with lights. On the radio, you will hear about the bells that jingle and how cold it is outside. And you're gonna eat a lot of high-calorie food, and you're gonna wear certain colors, and you're gonna see them everywhere. And on top of that, you're gonna spend a lot of money buying people gifts. Yeah, because 2,000 years ago, a baby was born in a little town called Bethlehem that most of us will probably never get to visit. And yet, there is something about the story that still speaks to us today. So my goal for today is to tell you the stories behind the story of Christmas. And I'll try to share with you the 2-minute version of those stories as we follow what would have been our drive-through. And we talk about the true story of Christmas, a story that had guts and grit, and a story that I think somehow can still speak to us today. But we cannot do Christmas without music. So let's do some Christmas music.
Oh, holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night of our dear Savior's birth. Long lay the world in sin and never pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. A thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. Fall on your knees, oh, hear the angels' voices, oh, night divine, oh, night when Christ was born. Oh, night divine, oh, night divine.
Holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night of our dear Savior's birth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. A thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. Fall on your knees, oh, hear the angels' voices, oh, night divine, oh, night when Christ was born.
divine, all night divine.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. So now it's time to start our story. If you would have arrived in the drive-thru, you would have been met by Caesar Augustus. Because yes, our story starts with Caesar and taxes. And back then, people really didn't like either of them. And I guess at least half of that hasn't changed much today. Now, the Caesar that would have greeted you would have been a very nice and gentle and kind Caesar, but not so the Caesar of our story. If you lived in the first century, you would have probably carried his picture in your pocket. No, it wasn't on your smartphone, but it would have been the social media of the time. It would have been in a coin, kind of like this one, or this one. I'm not sure where we're gonna put it on the screen, but there will be a picture of Caesar on the screen. And you see, these coins were the Twitter, the Instagrams of the time. If you were somebody, if you had followers, there would be a coin with your face on it. And I don't know what your opinion is of what Caesar looks like, but if you look closer at the coin, you will find Caesar's name on the front side, but on the back side, there's something even more interesting, because there on that coin, you will read Pax Orbis Terranum, which would have meant peace over the earth. See, during the Roman Empire, there was this idea of Roman peace, Pax Romana. And in Augustus' time, it would have been even more explicit than that. It would have been Augustus' peace, or Pax Augusta. But it was an interesting kind of peace. If you were to live in Palestine, one of the occupied or provinces that Rome ruled over, every now and then emissaries from Rome would come to your town and they would make a proclamation. And they would say things like, there is no other name under heaven through which we could have peace on earth other than Caesar. See, it is Caesar's power and might, his military courage, that has brought us peace on earth. But that peace, it was something else. Because after that proclamation, they would start collecting your taxes. And sometimes those taxes, especially in the provinces outside of Rome, were quite heavy, because Roman taxes were quite low, but it was those other territories, the occupied territories, that would pay for the good life of people in Rome. There's a story about a village not too far from Rome that had a terrible year. Some of their crops had failed and a famine had come, and they were really failing to let ends meet. And when Rome went to charge taxes, they kind of refused or couldn't even pay them. When word got to Rome, to Caesar, Caesar sent his soldiers. And on the road to that village, they lined 6,000 crosses. And on each of those crosses, they crucified one of the citizens of that village. That is some kind of peace, isn't it? See, that peace, it was so fragile because there was an underlying anxiety, an underlying violence that no amount of power could take away. But then you would have driven by Mary, who was sitting pondering all of these things in her heart. Somehow, Mary had a different kind of peace, a peace that no amount of earthly power could give, and a peace that no amount of earthly power could ever take away. But we'll get back to Mary later, because the interesting thing is that when the one who could give that peace came to earth, as you drove by the inn, you would have noticed that there was no room for him. About 5.5, 6 miles from Bethlehem was Jerusalem, the capital of the Jewish nation. For hundreds of years, they would have waited and expected a Messiah that would bring them peace. And yet when that Messiah came, when the one who could give true peace came to the world, no one came to receive him. He came to his own, but his own did not receive him. But then there were these shepherds. Now, a little bit about the shepherds. See, the shepherds were the original outsiders. Like, literally, they were always outside. And some of you like camping, but some of us have maybe some camping horror stories. And most of us know how fun and exciting camping can be. And we also know that after night 2, really quickly, it can get old. Well, these shepherds would have spent every day of their professional lives outside with the sheep. And while everybody was comfortably sleeping in their villages, maybe they didn't have a sleep number bed quite yet, but I'm sure they had at least a somewhat comfortable place to sleep. The shepherds would be outside taking care of their sheeps outside. And I did say sheeps. It's sheep. Christian would be here to correct me. I would appreciate it, but that just went unchecked. Sheep. The plural of sheep is sheep. Okay, we got it. And yes, we're going to pretend to do this live. Now, people didn't like shepherds very much. The Greeks thought that shepherds were just unsophisticated. They didn't think with their high philosophy that being a shepherd was very intellectual work, even though it takes a lot actually of intellect and knowledge to know how to shepherd sheep. They were kind of wrong, and they also thought that maybe it wasn't a very creative job or artistic, so the Greeks really didn't like shepherds. The Romans didn't like shepherds either. Maybe it was that they didn't smell too great, or for whatever reason, they didn't like shepherds. So the job of shepherds would go to people that really probably couldn't get many other jobs. It would go to the foreigners, the immigrants, the slaves, those who lost everything, orphans, the underprivileged. They were the ones that had to do the dirty job that nobody else would like to do. Yeah, they were really outsiders. But not only that, not only they were physically dirty and maybe some stinky, and the Romans didn't like that, but because they spent time with animals, a lot of time, and sadly the things that animals do, they were also always considered ceremonially dirty, or a more biblical term, ceremonially unclean. So every year, when in Jerusalem there were these great festivities, these great parties, that happened several times a year, they would have to take the sheep, because the sheep was what made those parties possible. And they would take, the sheep that they had raised and taken care of to the priests, to the wealthy families that owned them, and they would take the sheep to them, and those sheep would allow them to have the celebrations and these parties and the good times. They would be told, you cannot come in, you're dirty, you're not good enough. They were really the outsiders. And then there were the wise men. They were outsiders of perhaps another kind. They were outside of the nation of Israel altogether. We don't really know where they came from. Some people speculate some empires or nations where they might have come from far east. Some people think they were rulers. Other people think they were just very important and influential people. But somehow they had learned about the star. They had seen the star. They had seen this light. And somehow they knew what this meant. They had studied and searched, and they found a new kind of light shining right above them. And when they saw that star, when they saw that light, they weren't afraid to follow it. And they got on their camels. Yes, they cameled. Some people say over 500 miles. And when Jesus was born, when he was a little baby, these wise men, they were there. And while no one from Jerusalem came to greet him, these wise men from far, far away, they came bearing gifts. See, that's the interesting thing about Christmas. It reminds us that sometimes that gift, that treasure, that joy that we all want and we all long for, it could be right in front of us. And yet in the emptiness of our busyness, in the narrowness of our expectations, even in the blindness of our short-sighted desires, we might miss it all along. But to those who are searching, for those with open hearts, for those who are not afraid to go on the journey, for the meek and the outsiders, for the lowly and the lonely, to them, the angel said, God is on your side. To them, the angel said, do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy to all people. That night, they found peace. That night, they found joy. And now it's time for our second song.
chosen me now to carry your son.
I am waiting in a silent prayer. I am frightened by the load I bear in a world as cold as stone. Must I walk this path alone? Be with me now. Be with me now.
Breath of heaven, hold me together, be forever near me. Breath of heaven, breath of heaven, lighten my darkness, pour over me your holiness, for you are holy. Breath of heaven. Do you wonder as you watch my face if a wiser one should have had my place? But I offer all I am.
For the mercy of your plan, help me be strong, help me be, help me.
Breath of heaven, hold me together, be forever near me. Breath of heaven, breath of heaven, lighten my darkness, pour over me your holiness, for you are holy. Breath of heaven, hold me together, be forever near me. Breath of heaven, breath of heaven, lighten my darkness, pour over me your holiness, for you are holy. Breath of heaven, breath of heaven, breath of heaven.
And as you would imagine, this song has to bring us to Mary. Now, when our story takes place, Mary would have been between 13 to 16 years old. Some people say maybe a little bit older. Some people dare to say even maybe a little bit younger, but more than likely she was somewhere between 13 and 16 years of age. Life expectancy back then would have been like a whole 35 years, which would mean that, if I was alive back then, I would be breathing some of my very last breaths right now. And that's a pretty terrifying thought. So in spite of how difficult 2020 has been, I am grateful that I get to live now and not 2,000 years ago. But anyways, back to Mary. When the angel appeared to Mary, the angel said, Mary, you're gonna have a baby. And because Mary was a very good Jewish girl, she had some very basic questions, about nature, anatomy, and physiology. Because her first question was, how could this be? And as some Bible translation would put it, since I knoweth not a man, or since I haven't done that thing, that causes babies to come about. And the angel said, Mary, don't worry. Your child, your baby, the Holy Spirit is going to come upon you, and you're going to conceive a child that's coming from God. That's quite an answer. But that answer was actually a death sentence. And let alone if people would believe her or not, if people would have doubted of her integrity, she would have been stoned to death. But the angel would also appear to Joseph, and somehow together they would get through this crisis. But it wasn't a death sentence just because of that. It wasn't a death sentence just because even surviving childbirth was, a thing back then. Mortality rates were skyrocket high back then. But what the angel had said was actually extremely profound, because the angel didn't say you're going to have just a baby. The angel said this baby is going to be a son of David. This baby is going to be a king. And Mary had heard the stories. She had heard the stories about Caesar. She knew what Caesar did when even rumor got out of maybe a king coming to power. Mary knew how Caesar would deal with such problems. She had also heard the stories of Herod, how Herod would have his own children, his own sons, killed when he felt that his throne, his power would be threatened. So when word would get out that a king would be born, that a Messiah would be born, she knew that the entire forces of empire, that the entire power of darkness would be against this baby and against her. And yet, in spite of all of this, in the darkness of her day, facing the forces of empire, the forces of darkness, she was not afraid. She had the courage to believe, to trust, to lean in, to even dream. And when the angel spoke to her, she said, with courage, may it be done with me as you have said. Mary said, bring it on. Mary said, let's do this. Mary was courageous. Mary was fierce. Mary would hold this child, and she would love and she would cherish the son that she had bore. She would see him grow up and become the light that this world so desperately needed. She would see this baby boy become a man, and she would see this man, this Son of God, heal the sick and feed the hungry. She would see Jesus touch the untouchables and love the unlovables, and she would see him mending the wounds of the hurt and the hearts of the brokenhearted. And for all of that, she would see him nailed on a Roman cross. And as the nails would pierce his hands, he would shout out, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And on that cross, as darkness surrounded and covered that mountain, God was with us. He was with us in our suffering and in our violence. He was with us in our anger and in our pain. And He loved us to the end. And because He loved us, He never fought back. He never allowed that violence and anxiety to continue in circulation. He swallowed it up. He took it all in and He took it out of circulation. And because He never lashed out, death couldn't hold Him. The darkness couldn't hold Him. John, being an old man who would have been there at the foot of that cross, who would have seen Jesus taking His last breath, who would have heard Jesus telling him, you take Mary, she's now your mother, and she would have heard Jesus telling Mary, Mary, take John, he's now your son. That John, having witnessed all of these things, now he's an old man. Many years later, he's in his 90s, 95 AD, just about. He's thinking about this friend Jesus, as he's thinking of everything that has happened since then. He had seen his friends, his fellow disciples, persecuted, killed. He had seen Rome send the legions to siege the city of Jerusalem. And during that siege, which took 7 months, he would see all the death and suffering that came about as they starved and as disease broke out in the city and they lacked water and food and true crisis came out, and he would see millions died and hundreds of thousands taken captive. As he would have seen all of these things, he would have seen the Roman army piercing the walls of Jerusalem. He would see the temple destroyed. And he would have heard the stories of Jesus through Mary herself, his childhood, the story of Christmas. As he writes his gospel, their last gospel to be written, after the first generation of Christians have gone and died and rested in Jesus, he's thinking about those who would come after, about you and me. And as he's thinking about Jesus, at the very beginning, chapter 1 of his gospel, he writes, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. That life was the light of the world. And then he would go on and said, how could I share this with everything that I have seen? And he says, that light shines in the darkness. And the darkness has not overcome it. Because that John, he would see his friend Jesus alive again. He says, I have to share this story, so that when my friends, at the end of his gospel, he says, I write this so one day those who come after me will believe, and by believing they will have life. John wrote this story so that one day one of us could read it and in it find life. And as John is writing this beautiful story of Jesus, after writing the story about a man, his name was Nicodemus, who needed to live life anew, and he came to Jesus in darkness of night and confused and not knowing what to do, trying to encounter light. Jesus gives him a way to be born again, to live life anew. And then John has this stroke of genius, and he said, I'm going to include this sentence. How could I put it? And John begins to write, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, so that whoever you and whoever the you next to you, whoever, and then he uses his phrase, believes in him, will not die, but have everlasting life. And can you imagine being John writing those words? And maybe his word, will anyone ever read this gospel? Will anyone ever remember these words? And then he wrote, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that through him, through him, you and I might be saved. And that's the story of Christmas. A God who loved so much that he gave His only Son, who was life, in whom life was, and that life was the light of the world, so that His light could overcome our darkness. And that light continues to shine even today. Because today, no one really calls on the name of Caesar anymore, unless you want some very affordable and maybe okay pizza from Little Caesar. And yet throughout the world, we continue to celebrate Christmas. We continue to celebrate Advent. We continue to celebrate a God who loved us so much that He became one of us, that He gave us His only begotten Son, Jesus, so that in Him we could find life. In Him we could be saved. And that's the beauty of the story of Christmas. It reminds us that it is in the darkest moment that light can shine most beautifully. It tells us that real change is not only possible, but that real change could start with us. It tells us that maybe the more alone that we may feel, the more God wants you to know that He's on your side. Christmas reminds us that those who seek, they will find. That those who make room, joy will fill their hearts. That for those who dare to dream and to believe, for those who are willing to lean in and take another step, a better, truer, brighter, and more beautiful life is just waiting to burst forth from within. For them, Jesus came. For them, Jesus is here. For them, Jesus is coming again. For them, new life is ready to burst forth. So I don't know where you find yourself in the story. I don't know where Christmas finds you in this year 2020. Maybe like Caesar, you're grasping for control, trying to play, king of your own little empire, king of your castle. And this year, maybe it felt like things were falling apart, and maybe we're taking Caesar's approach, double down, more power, more strength, let's do this. And yet there's an underlying anxiety that always leads us to violence that we cannot shake away. Or maybe like those people in Jerusalem or in the inn, in the emptiness of our busyness, we are missing the gift that could be right in front of us. This 2020, where so many people have lost work, maybe you've been busier than ever, working from home, working from the office, working everywhere in between, from the car, from your bedroom. You cannot escape the busyness now. Maybe that's where Christmas finds you this year. Or maybe like the shepherds, you were made to feel like you're an outsider, that you don't belong, maybe even that you're a little dirty, unclean, not good enough. Or maybe like the wise men, you came from very far away. Maybe not physically, but maybe spiritually or in your own journey. Or maybe like Mary, all around you there's darkness, danger, the darkness of empire, the darkness of what people might feel about it, the darkness of violence, of hurt and pain. But no matter where Christmas finds you this year, I pray that this Christmas, Jesus will find room in your heart to give you that which you always, always long for. That maybe this Christmas, maybe even today, you will experience Jesus and the light and joy that He can give in a brand new way, so that His light can overcome our darkness, that the peace, that the joy that we all long for can be ours today. So that all of that change, that joy, that life that we all want to live, it may start within us, even now. Because after all of this, we are the true story behind Christmas. You are the true story behind Christmas. because you are the reason for which he came.
All is calm and all is bright everywhere, but in your heart tonight they're singing carols of joy and peace, but you feel too far gone and too far out of reach. Somewhere in your silent night, heaven hears the song your broken heart has cried.
Hope is here, just lift your head, for love has come to find you.
Somewhere in your silent night.
From heaven's height to manger low, there is no distance the Prince of Peace won't go. From manger low to Calvary's hill, when your pain runs deep, his love runs deeper still.
He has always loved you, child, and he always will. Somewhere in your silent night, heaven hears the song your broken heart has cried. Hope is here, just lift your head, for love has come to find you. Somewhere in your silent night, lift your head, lift your heart. Emmanuel will meet you where you are. He knows your hurt, he knows your name, and you're the very reason that he came. Somewhere in your silent night, heaven hears the song your broken heart has cried. Hope is here, just lift your head, for love has come to find you. Somewhere in your silent night, love will find you. Oh, love will find you. Love will find you.
And that is the story of Christmas, our story, because we are the story of Christmas. May you find this Christmas or day after Christmas the light that overcomes all darkness, the peace that goes beyond all understanding, and a truer, more beautiful, more lasting kind of joy in Jesus. And may that light, may that peace, may that joy shine through you to all those around you until the day we see him again.